All right, welcome everybody to our Ask the Expert webinar, which we are really excited about. We've had some really great questions come in from those of you who filled that form out before in order to register for the event. So thank you for those who brought questions to us ahead of time. We're going to be going through those today, as well as any live questions that come in. Before we get started, I wanted to allow everybody to introduce themselves on the panel. And then we are going to hand things over to Sarah, who will introduce herself in a moment, to be the MC and help pose the questions to various members of the panel. So thanks again to everyone who is joining us. I see the numbers kind of ticking up on attendees. So while we go around the introductions, we will then, after we go through the introductions, we will get started on the questions. So thanks again for joining us. I will actually hand it over to Jay first to introduce himself. I'm Parlin, and I'm the director of BrightBuilt, so I guess I'll say that. I was going to say to send it to Jay first, and I'll come back around to me, but that felt unwieldy. So there we have it. Already off to a smooth beginning. So I'm going to also change my name on my screen so you guys can see who I am. So now I will hand it over to Jay.
Thanks, Parlin. I'm Jay Sandiford. Do the sales here at BrightBuilt, and likely the first person you'll talk to when you reach out. And we'll go down to Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Benner. I'm a project coordinator with BrightBuilt Home. Been with BrightBuilt for 6 years now. And I'll hand it to Joe.
Hello, I'm Joe Martin, Regional Sales Manager for KBS Builders. I've worked with BrightBuilt for 10 years or so, modular construction. Hand it over to Sarah.
Hi, everyone. I am Sarah. I do operations and marketing for BrightBuilt. We're so glad you all joined us today. I'm going to just start here by opening up for a general Q&A before we go into the list of questions that were pre-submitted. If anybody here in attendance has a question, you can pop it into the chat, raise your hand, or drop it into the Q&A. So I'll be checking that. I don't see anything just yet. So we'll go into our first question that was pre-submitted for either Joe or Parlin. How are you dealing with supply line issues and long lead times on building materials?
If you'd like me to take that, Parlin.
Mm-hmm.
So it's certainly been challenging because it's not just one particular item. It seems to go through different cycles. Some materials are longer lead times, but it certainly helps that we have several vendors for the same materials. Most of the materials that we use are common and are readily available, but I think communication and scheduling, having things not immediately at hand, but having some time to get them in place has been something that's been a work in process. I'm going to say it's not been easy, but I think we've worked through it fairly well. And having alternative materials available when something gets discontinued has been helpful as well.
I would just add to that too, Joe, that there have been a couple instances in which we have a solid vendor from whom we can source things fairly readily, depending on which line of theirs from which we're sourcing. Mm-hmm. So there may be, if those who are watching today or anyone who's watching this in a recording, if you're getting into the design process now, you may see this come up where we recommend looking at specific lines by given vendors, because we know that the alternate line or the different line that's also offered by the same vendor is on a very long lead time, or there may be special circumstances within certain vendors, such as with windows, if you have a color that you're adding to the window or you're doing some sort of special upgrade on that window, that may add more significantly to the lead times than in years past. So there are some cases where we have sort of nuanced guidance that we're offering based on details that we're learning in real time from specific vendors.
Great. So next question is for Jay. This person says, I'm very interested and would like to know how to start the process of building a home in Massachusetts. Do you have prior clients in Massachusetts, and where? And what guidelines or support do you offer before we commit to the project? Pricing is always the big question.
That's a great question. And the way we operate from Maine to Virginia is by using local GCs. So we reach out to them once we sign a project to see about their availability. We worked in numerous towns in Massachusetts, and it's not uncommon for us to be down there. We don't typically reach out to that GC prior to someone signing because we don't want to be chasing their tails around for each possible new project. They wouldn't call us back if we did so. So happy to chat with people about the possibility of introducing them to someone once they sign a contract with us.
We have
Did I dig into that enough, Sarah?
What's that?
Did I dig into that one enough?
Yeah, I think so. Unless anybody else has anything they want to add on the panel.
The only thing I would add is that the process of building a home in Massachusetts specifically is not necessarily any different than it is anywhere else in which we work. So if you have questions that are specific to Massachusetts, you certainly can follow up with us, but we do have some good builder representation in various parts of Massachusetts. One thing, if it is in a much more remote, or it's an area where we don't have as much builder coverage, then we have mechanisms for identifying new builder candidates as well. So the process can vary a little bit depending on exactly where you're located, whether it's Massachusetts or elsewhere, and depending upon what that local general contractor coverage looks like for us specifically, and the bench that we have in that particular location. So it's a somewhat nuanced answer because there are a lot of different variables that we're constantly weighing in every area in which we work. But certainly we can have a very specific conversation to address any other questions on that regard if you contact us, Jay, or any one of us directly.
We have a live question here from one of our participants today. From Tim, do many of your customers struggle with setting a BrightBuilt Home budget due to uncertainty about site-related costs?
Yes. I think the answer to that is yes. So there's a number of variables when you're building a home. Two of the bigger variables are the site work that's going to be needed, i.e. the well, septic, driveway installation, as well as the finishes on the home. So what type of flooring you're going to choose, the siding, and so on. So there's definitely a number of variables, and site work is one of the bigger ones that, especially lately, that we're seeing site work numbers have gone up considerably over the past probably 12 to 15 months.
So to help address that, also just to speak to that additionally, real quick, we do have what we call our construction ballpark, and it's essentially an exercise that folks who call in and speak with Jay, they'll walk through with Jay early on in the conversation to help serve as a litmus test for what the anticipated project costs might be. We have essentially 3 categories of site work costs that we try to update as frequently as possible per what we're learning from data in the industry. And those give you very broad stroke, what we're hearing for this type, what you're describing as this type of site is likely this cost for doing the site work on that site. It's a best guess scenario. It's based on what we're hearing directly from clients who are speaking with us. And so it can happen that a builder can arrive on site or an excavator can arrive on site and see a different reality, either to the improvement on numbers or sometimes the detriment on numbers, depending on what exactly those variables are. So there's also, it's happened where when clients begin their conversations with Jay or begin their conversations with us, they have a particular location for the home in mind on their site. And then once we get into design, that location changes for various reasons. And that can have, of course, impact on the costs for the site intervention as well. So rest assured, we do have some tools to help speak to what we're generally seeing. So if you want to have some of those preliminary conversations with Jay to get a feel for what we're seeing, we can certainly offer that. Then the more focused numbers would come once the general contractor gets on site and sees the full scope of variables to price.
Okay, a question here for Jess and also maybe Joe. At what distance from construction do you see the benefits of modular offsite construction diminish? I have a build site in the Rockies that I'm weighing options for.
I can jump in, and then Joe can add if he wants. So often we see about a 300-mile radius from around a factory, at least here in the Northeast. So anything greater than that, manufacturers may not be willing to go that distance, and or shipping costs become extreme. That's a short answer. There's also lots of nuance to that. Joe, do you have anything to add?
Not really. Mainly the challenge that I have, of course, is not knowing what the site costs are for those particular areas. So to be able to do a, comparison, an apples to apples comparison, is a pretty challenging item. The further you go away from the factory, of course, like you were saying, in excess of 300 miles, you do certainly get into more added costs for transportation, servicing, et cetera. But I don't know what that magic number is or sweet spot is, so to say, of what would be best one way or the other.
Either way, we're not delivering to Colorado at the moment.
Unfortunately.
I did not hear
though.
that. Yeah.
Jay said either way, we're not delivering to the Colorado Rockies at the moment.
Got it.
But we do have plans to continue expanding and growing. So stay tuned, because perhaps we will one day be able to cover that region soon, maybe.
For Parlin, this person says, I'm interested in net zero off-grid build on a mountain slope and understanding the costs and process.
This is a great question, and one to which we would generally ask a lot more questions for clarification and understanding exactly what the circumstances are that you're working with. So if it's a side of a mountain to which you have excellent access, either road or driveway, then it's a pretty feasible lift for us. We certainly have delivered to a lot of areas that are a little bit more remote here in Maine, and it is definitely very feasible to explore that and look at what the costs might be. Exactly what you're looking to design will then inform further numbers for us to speak to. So is it a single module? Is it one of our sidekick designs, or is it one of the full homes? What does that look like in terms of cost? And then as far as off-grid, that's a great question. It's one to which we can speak in general terms, but we actually have yet to do a full off-grid project. And the reason for that is because, generally speaking, it's not cost effective. It's more cost effective to stay grid tied with the way that the technology works today. So it is possible, certainly, to go off grid. If you're doing so with a home equipped with all of the same appliances and plug loads and all of the same considerations that a typical American home might have, then it's going to require a fairly substantial battery system. And those battery systems generally upwards of at least $40,000 to $50,000 just for the battery system itself. So that's not including the photovoltaic array. That's not including some of the other variables in this case. So going fully off grid is certainly a conversation to be had with a lot more information on the table to weigh whether or not it's really a feasible option. If you're extremely remote from the mainline sources of electricity, it can be a very good thing to explore for sure. You also need to ensure, of course, that you have really good solar access to continually power and recharge those batteries. So there's a lot of different things that go into answering that particular question. It's certainly something we can explore and something we would be happy to discuss with further information. In terms of costs, we'd have to know those different variables to be able to know what that would look like for you. But it's a great question. It's definitely part of our vision is to continue to massage and evolve the package of what we offer to include the off-grid angle for those who are interested in doing that.
Thanks, Parlin. For Jay, a somewhat related question about sites. Can you come out and do a free site assessment to determine where the home is best built?
Sorry, my internet was a little.
So Jay, I think your internet is still a little unstable, so maybe we can come back to that question. So in the meanwhile, Jess, can you describe how the process differs for 18-foot wide modules?
So the process of design doesn't necessarily differ all that much since we have a pre-designed sidekick camp. I assume that it's in reference to a 18-foot wide sidekick camp, although if you're in Maine, we could explore that as a custom design. However, the 18-foot wide module can only be delivered to sites in Maine. So that, affects the process to some degree and the shipping of that module to a site in Maine, as well as if we're talking about the sidekick specifically, an 18-foot wide module is constructed differently than a 14-foot wide module in that it essentially arrives with a roof cap instead of a hinged roof. And we can get into the details about that a little bit, but the process of constructing the actual module and how it's set onto its foundation and how the components are pieced together will vary from the standard 14-foot wide module. And that is, to be clear, for the sidekick only. Anything to add, anyone?
Right. Jay, are you back to us or?
I think so. Sorry about that. I'm a
That's
little
okay.
wonky over here on the internet.
This is a Zoom reality. So the question was, can you come out and do a free site assessment to determine where the home is best built?
We don't do a free site assessment in the sense of coming out onto the property itself. I can certainly take a look at it online and talks a lot about how to site a home on a lot. After you sign with us, if you come out, you can charge an hourly rate to come out to the site typically. I will also say that for many of the projects that we've done, in Virginia, again, we are rarely on the site prior to the delivery of the modules. We use the site survey as well as Google and then our localized GC partner to give us a good feel for what's on the ground. There's nothing free these days.
For Parlin, thinking about building a tiny home and still looking for land, but want to understand the process. Like, how do I learn local regulations, things like that?
That's a great question. Local regulations are always a bit of a quandary or a bit of a mystery, I should say, depending on where you live. The first place to start is always the town website, and to determine whether or not they have a planning or building permitting regulatory department that has to do with residential construction. You can certainly start to comb through that. Now, it sounds like you don't have land yet, so you may not yet have a town in which you know you're going to build, but if you do know the town in which you're going to build, even if you're still looking for available properties within that town, starting with a website is always a good place to start, but oftentimes it may be the easiest to simply call the town office and ask if they, you know, to who would be the right person to talk to start with questions regarding tiny homes specifically, as well as regulations for building and construction in that town. You'll then be directed to the right person. It might be the town CEO, or it might be the town head of planning. There could be different, you know, every town is structured differently, unfortunately, which can make it a little bit fun to navigate these questions as you're digging into them on a town by town basis. But I would definitely start first with the question about whether or not tiny homes are permitted in the area in which you're hoping to build, because there are some municipalities which are now instituting regulations on tiny homes. So to confirm that it is even allowed in the area that you're wanting to build would be really critical to know before you purchase land in that area. So even if you find a piece of property in a town you haven't researched yet, I would definitely call that town to start before you close on the property. As far as the costs go, so the definition of a tiny home would be, you know, like whether or not we do tiny homes at BrightBuilt would depend on your definition of them. We do have designs that start in the 400 square foot range. So the Sidekick Mini could very well be deemed a tiny home by many. And if that is the range in which you're thinking, then we could take a look at that in the same way that we look at costs for projects, for all of our projects, small and large, to give you a sense of what the potential costs might be for building that home. If the definition of tiny home in your mind is one that is in the 8-foot width and generally built on a flatbed trailer, that's not a realm in which we currently dwell. But certainly, yeah, happy to answer that question about the zoning piece of that. That tipping point may also inform what is permitted in your town. So if you are thinking about that 8-foot wide flatbed trailer style tiny home, that will likely be under different regulatory status than a fixed small structure with a very small footprint that is placed on a foundation or placed on piers and meant to stay put in its site. So that would be another important distinction to make with the town officer with whom you speak to ensure that it's doable.
So for Jay, Parlin, actually maybe everyone. So we have a couple questions about costs, which I think have been covered, but also timelines. So what kind of timelines are we looking at currently for projects in general and building?
Jay, do you want to start that by fielding it for the design timeline? And then maybe we can ask Joe for his input on the factory timeline.
Sure. What I'm telling people is right now, if you sign on with me this month, you would start your design in March with an architectural designer on the team. And from that start point, depending upon the size and complexity of the project, it could take between 10 and 15 months before you're actually in that home. And to give you an example, prior to COVID, we would have had you in design in a month and you would have been in that home in probably 6 to 8 months. So, you know, we're seeing numerous things which are leading to the variableness of that home being finished. Joe, do you have anything to add to that?
So, you know, the only thing that varies with us is in relation to the lead times of the products selected. You know, if they're basic type of materials, delivery can be done usually a little bit quicker. If you're picking some, you know, windows from Europe, you know, you obviously are looking at a much longer time, just mainly for the delivery of the product. That's it.
Good.
Carla and Jess, anything to add on that?
I'd say that just to add that design time, the time it takes to sort of work the steps of a design process has not varied all that much. It's pretty consistently 3 months. However, as Jay noted, that we're sort of, starting later. If you signed on today, you'd start in March, sort of thing. So that adds the months to the process.
And then I would just add to that is true in terms of the fully scripted perfect world streamline of the design process. And so, there may be things that come up on our end, though oftentimes it's a matter of, is there scheduling conflicts that the clients have, and or are there decisions that have to be made or discussions that are warranted with the builder? So there are various external factors that can sometimes expand or potentially contract that timeline on design, depending on the speed and decision-making process and all of the various factors within the design process itself. So it's a great conversation to have early on with the project coordinator with whom you're working. If you have specific timeline goals and whether it's possible to meet those goals, or whether there's going to be different variables we have to incorporate into building that timeline.
Jay, is it cost prohibitive to build a BrightBuilt home outside the Northeast? And do you build in Tennessee?
Well, I think we kind of approached this question earlier on with the transportation issue. Currently, we're not shipping to Tennessee, so it would be fairly cost prohibitive. In addition, I think the South has different ideas of what homes are built for. What we're seeing up here right now is closer to $400 a square foot, which would probably not be viable in the South.
So now we're going to get into some more design specific ideas. So Parlin, can a sidekick be set on a slab? And can solar panels power radiant floor heat with current technology? If so, what ratio of solar panels to square feet of house floor is needed?
I'll start with the first. Sorry, there's follow-up.
There are follow-ups, but yeah, if you want to start there.
Okay. Regarding can a sidekick be set on a slab? So the very protracted and hesitant response to that is it's possible, but there are a lot of things to weigh, and it's really not advisable. So the general premise behind the modular construction, as you can see in the image actually that's right behind Joe, is that the module is entirely constructed offsite as a cohesive piece. So that's to include the floor framing, the wall framing, the ceiling framing, all of the elements that create that box or that cube. And so to set on a slab introduces two factors. One, the accessibility to and into the various systems. So if you're setting on a slab, if it's a single module and you're setting on a slab, it could be possible to centralize the core of all of the utilities coming into the module. And then the accessibility would be through that core. And in that version, the wood framing would be setting down on that slab. So that's also arguably not advisable for just the long-term health of that framing on top of that concrete slab. If you wanted to set down onto a slab and have a concrete slab as your floor, you would then lose all of the cost effectiveness of having something built off site, because you would effectively have the shell delivered and the floor framing would then be removed, and all of the partition walls, all of the fixtures and plumbing and all of that would be done on site. So what is really the more appropriate short answer is no, it's not really viable to set on a slab, because of those two scenarios not really being ideal for the long-term use and maintenance of the home itself, and just the feasibility in construction of making that workable. We can, however, set on piers or posts. So it is conceivable to have a fairly light touch on the ground condition and bring in a fully equipped, ready to go, finished interior sidekick to a site. So as opposed to digging a full foundation with a stem wall and all of those different elements. Part two of the question was with regard to radiant heat. So we've had this discussion a couple times with various mechanical engineers, and the truth is the technology is not quite there yet to make this a viable function of taking solar energy, heating hot water, and then using it as a radiant heat source. The other piece to that too is in high performance homes in particular, what we have found with radiant heat is that it doesn't really cycle that much. It doesn't actually get triggered to come on very much. So it ends up being a pretty large infrastructural cost of installation. And then without really that gain. Furthermore, in places like an old Maine farmhouse where you have a really drafty or really strong thermal gradient that you notice pretty distinctly, having a radiant floor gives you a really wonderful sense of comfort and a wonderful sense of being warmed from your feet up while you're within the midst of that drafty thermal gradient environment. In a high performance structure where you don't have those same thermal gradients and drafty qualities, you also don't get that same psychological connection to the radiant floor heat. So not only are you not feeling it come on, but even if you did, it doesn't provide kind of the same psychological level of, oh, good, I'm being warmed now from the floor up because I'm in this drafty environment. So there's a couple of reasons why we don't do radiant floor heating in our homes, and those are the primary reasons. But as far as the technology goes, it's not quite there yet because of the temperatures to which the heat needs to be heated for radiant floor. It's actually a fairly low temp, and the technology doesn't really exist to make that a good, efficient, consistent delivery of a warm, radiant, hydronic heating system. So that's my convoluted answer to that question. And then the follow-ups were what, Sarah?
They are wondering about a Tesla wall battery and if it would be suited to a sidekick.
Certainly could be, yes. And this goes back to the off-grid question, perhaps, if that's the intent behind using it. So batteries can always be used in homes that are grid tied as a backup source. So if you have a power outage or you want to island essentially your photovoltaic array, you want to isolate a portion of the photovoltaic array to feed energy to a battery, you can always do that. And so the Tesla Powerwalls are great batteries out on the market right now. There are a couple different vendors for batteries. That's one of them. And yeah, it could be a very viable option. My suspicion for a sidekick that has the standard suite of appliances and usage would be that you probably would need at least 2 or 3 Powerwalls. Certainly if, or more potentially if you want to be fully off grid. So that would be a better question, I would say, for an electrical engineer or a solar installer to be able to speak to exactly what the requirements would be for that.
Okay. For Jess, in a previous webinar, you highlighted plans for sidekicks with shed and butterfly roof designs. Wondering if any were built and if you have any pictures or additional information.
We do, short answer. So I believe the one that was shown or toured on our digital platform in that webinar is now built. So we have some photos that we can share of that one. And then we also have some working designs of the others. I say the best way to be able to view that would be to contact Jay so that he can share those images and plans.
It's a great segue into our next question, unless Carlin, you wanted to add.
I don't want to add anything to that particularly, but I just wanted to quickly reiterate that anyone who has a question that they'd like to pose live, feel free to throw that in the Q&A. And we're monitoring that, as well as going through the questions that were pre-sent. Some of you who came in a couple minutes after we did our intro might not have heard that initial cue.
Thank you. So for Jay, is it possible to review drawings of how other BrightBuilt Home customers have modified the standard designs?
I would say almost every BrightBuilt customer will modify the standard designs. I'm certainly happy to jump on a Zoom call and go through some of those design changes that we've done and look at full plan sets, which we can't send through email, but happy to show you a variety of different options for each of the model lines.
In some cases, I think there may be too many options to review. In most cases, maybe like, you know, in the teens of ways that one could vary design.
Yeah, what you see online is just the starting point. So what we're worried about is the footprint of that home for that particular model. Everything within the footprint can be moved around, whether it's a window, door, where the kitchen perhaps sits. And we're doing that based upon how the sun's going to hit it for solar gain, and then interplaying that with your preferences to how you want to live within the home.
For Carlin, can we put a fireplace in a BrightBuilt home?
Great question. You can imagine, being in the Northeast, we get this one quite a lot. Again, depending on your definition of a fireplace, the answer is yes. So we can do a fireplace that is actually more of a wood stove or a wood stove insert into a masonry surround that has all appearances of a fireplace, but has the ability, and this is the key, to be sealed essentially from the rest of the house. And any system that we do, either wood burning or gas fueled, does need to be compatible with a high performance structure, meaning it needs to have its own supply of air that's independent to drawing from the house and the volume of the house itself. And it needs to, of course, be very sufficiently vented. There are also different schools of thought within the industry as to when and where it's wise to do the installation of a wood or gas burning implement, whether it's a wood stove or an appliance. And we have some literature that we'd be happy to share, but it's just an important discussion, and that folks are aware of the really meticulously monitored and managed air balance within the home is an important piece, obviously, to the performance of the home and the air quality within the home. And so anytime you introduce a wood or fossil fuel burning appliance or wood stove to the picture, there are different factors that need to be understood in the use of that product. So short answer is yes, as long as it's a sealed unit that has its own makeup air and is properly vented. Longer answer is, let's talk about what some of the different considerations are if you are interested in going that route. But we certainly have many homeowners that happily have gas and wood stove units in their homes that know these various factors. And the other piece, just to add on to, is most wood stoves, gas burning or wood stoves, even the small ones, generate significantly more heat than is required to heat the entirety of the home. So certainly in the smaller homes, this is a big factor, but really in any of the homes, most standard wood stoves generate at least 30,000 kBTU for the home, which is substantially more than what most of our homes require to heat them. I'm only adding that to make note of it from the standpoint of, if you were planning to use this wood stove quite a lot, you will be quite warm most of the time in your home. So, you know, definitely it's great to have for ambiance, or just for some folks in New England, peace of mind, but important to know all of the variables. that go with it.
We have a live question here. You gave an approximation of 400 per square foot for homes built in New England. Is the foundation basement cost calculated at the same rate?
The square footage number is actually including allowances for the foundation and basement costs. So that's in there. So it'd be everything you need to take, basically a green lot, a lot that's ready to be built on, and everything you need to do to move into that home besides the kitchen appliances and the solar array. Those are two things that we don't put in the square footage number. So the square footage number does cover a considerable amount of the home. And Susan, I'm happy to jump on a call with you, understand what you're looking to do, and put together a construction ballpark for you as well. That'll be, you'll be able to see a little bit more of what the line items are for each of those homes.
I would also just quickly add to that, that 400 number, to reiterate or reemphasize what Jay just said, it is a turnkey number. It's meant to be a number that is all inclusive, including allowances, as Jay said, for what we presume will be the site costs based on how the site is described. So there are a lot of builders and folks out there who generally just keep the site out of it and maybe quoting cost per square foot numbers that don't include site. So it's just important for us to make sure it's clear that what we're talking about when we throw those numbers out is really just the entire kit and caboodle for the project, based on what we can understand for those conditions. I also would say that it's not a hard and fast number, and it is a number that's very beholden to just arithmetic. So if you are building a larger square foot home, something in the 2,000 to 3,000 square foot range, it's very conceivable that we can see that number come down, particularly with efficiencies that we're using by working with the factory and doing different levels of finishes in the factory. If you're building a very small footprint home, like a Sidekick or Sidekick Mini, you still have the same structural costs of a larger home, where you have to get into the site, do site work, do clearing, have a well, have a septic, all those different considerations. So you may see that number skew higher. So Jay's throwing that number out there as kind of an all encompassing kind of median average that we're seeing right now based on COVID impacted numbers. But just wanted to add a little bit of finer grain to that to offer for folks that are maybe placing themselves in one end of the spectrum or other in terms of the size of home that they're hoping to build.
This is maybe a redundancy after the discussion that we just had, but if there's anything to add, this person has asked, can you hazard a guess at the cost of a finished 1,000-foot square home of passive solar legal dwelling?
Obviously, there's a number of variables in there. 1,000 square feet could mean our Sidekick camp, which has a loft in it to get to around 1,000 square feet, a little over that actually. We just finished one of those in Harpswell, Maine. That one came in around $420,000. That included everything it needed to move into that home. Happy to send some pictures to folks who are interested in seeing more of that. Our Sebago line, which is 1,350 square feet, is actually 2 boxes versus the one with the camp. And I would say those are more likely closer with a garage to $600,000 right now. Some of the numbers that we're seeing are about 30, even as high as 40% more than they were just 15 months ago. So just to give you guys some context as to what's going on in the industry.
Thanks, Jay. The last pre-submitted question we have here for Harlan, do you use soapstone in your designs? Would it be a good material to use to help with heat? Yeah.
So soapstone from the standpoint of a surface in kitchens, which is commonly used, is absolutely a possibility. The kitchen surface in and of itself is entirely at the discretion of the client and or the client's budget. And so that that absolutely can be done. Any stones or hard surfaces that are used in the kitchen specifically are installed on site. So those are sourced from a local vendor and installed by a local installer. If you're speaking to soapstone from the standpoint of a thermal mass for surfaces elsewhere in the house, it's not something we have done historically. And in general, the high performance kind of passive solar methodology and thinking has, I would say, evolved and transformed a little bit from the origin days, so to speak, or at least the origin days in modern psychology of construction. In the 70s, thermal mass was really strongly emphasized as a critical component of passive solar and passive solar high performance structures, because at that time, windows and to some degree wall and insulation, and in particular mechanicals technology, were not then what they are today. So having the sun come into the space and heat up a substantial thermal mass in order to retain that heat through the colder hours of the night was an important aspect of passive solar design in that era. Today, where we have much better thermal envelopes, much better insulation strategies for the walls, much better windows and doors that have triple panes, are better sealed, are built with more durable and airtight components. We don't have that same need to retain heat in a thermal mass to carry the heat through the night. We also have mechanical systems that are able to perform at really cold temperatures and really efficient power usages. So from the standpoint of thermal mass, it's really not something that's deemed critical any longer for passive solar design. We still use the sun very much so in our designs. And in fact, in most of our homes, the sun and the radiant heat from the sun accounts for about 1/3 of the heat load requirement for the home. So the homes are definitely still geared towards and designed with passive solar in mind, but without the need for that thermal mass.
Thanks, Parlin. Does anybody here in attendance have a question that they want to submit? If you do, you can do so in the Q&A button. And while we wait to see if anybody submits anything, any final parting words from our panelists?
I would just like to add that I think a lot of people out there who might be searching for land and wondering what our house costs, they're wondering the idea of putting the cart before the horse, or understanding what your home is going to cost before you know what you can purchase a lot of land for. I'm willing to jump on a call with you, and as I mentioned earlier, put together a construction ballpark and a contract so you can see how that unfolds, to give you as much information that you need to as you're going through the process. So feel free to reach out to me. My email is just the letter J at brightbuilthome.com. You've likely communicated with me because you're on this list to receive information about this webinar. But again, happy to chat with folks, and I will be working sporadically over the holidays, so happy to have chats during that time as well.
And I'd just like to jump in to thank everyone for your questions and for your attendance today. We're always really happy to have these webinar sessions, and we're always really happy to field as many questions as we can and help inform the process as much as we possibly can for everyone who's interested.
Say a special thank you to Joe Martin for joining us from KBS to help lend insight to that portion of the process as well.
Thanks, Joe.
Oh, thank you.
I was just going to add that. Thank you, Joe. Yeah.
Appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
I don't see any more questions, so we can probably wrap up. Thanks again to Joe and Parlin, Jay, and Jess for being here. And thank you all for joining us. Feel free to reach out to J, the letter J, at brightbuilthome.com. And you can also reach out to us at info@brightbuilthome.com. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas.